go ahead and get this kicked off. So first I'll do an introduction. My name is Michelle Haw, and I am one of the co-founders of EarlyHR Solutions and EarlyEngage. You've also got a few other photos here. We've got LeAnne who is our presenter today. Samantha Coletti is our engagement concierge, and she is the person who coordinates all of our events. And then we've also got Janelle Yessian, who's the other co-founder of EarlyEngage. We are super excited to be here today. We are going to be talking about, Sam, if you can go back, how to send belonging cues throughout every stage of the employee life cycle. We're super excited to have LeAnne here to talk about practical ways that you can send powerful belonging cues throughout the 7 stages of the employee life cycle necessary for building relationships with colleagues and driving employee engagement and retention. Just a little bit about LeAnne. She has been one of our partners now for, gosh, it's been over a year or so. She's an HR consultant and keynote speaker who helps organizations improve their engagement and retention. Not only is she certified as a SHRM practitioner, she's also a coach with Clifton Strengths, and she's an adjunct faculty at Missouri State University, where she teaches professional communication courses to MBA students. Prior to going off on her own, LeAnne was a faculty member and the director of public speaking in the College Media and of Communication at Texas Tech, where she served for 14 years. She's a proud mom to 3 children and to 2 pet prairie dogs. Okay, I'm gonna have to find out more about that someday. LeAnne, I did not know that. So before, a couple housekeeping items before I turn it over to LeAnne. First of all, we are just delighted to have you here. Want you to just pay note to the bottom of your screen. We have a couple of options that you can utilize to make this interactive. We've got the chat button, which you're welcome to utilize as freely as you'd like. Janelle is going to be watching the chat and kind of interrupting or pausing as needed to make sure so that LeAnne can focus on her presentation, but we'll be watching the chat. And also, if you've got a question, feel free to use the raise your hand feature as well, because we like to, even though you're not on camera, if you're grabbing your lunch or whatever, we want you to feel free to participate through one of those functions. And one more thing, just want to make a few announcements. In celebration of Black History Month, I thought it would be fun to talk about at least 3 things that I'm aware of that happened just this week, making Black history with 3 Black women. So first of all, we had the Grammy Awards this week. Beyonce became an all-time Grammy winner with 32 Grammys, which is super duper exciting. And Viola Davis, who I just absolutely love, she achieved EGOT status, which basically means now that she has an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony Award, which is amazing. And then we've got Autumn Lockwood, who I don't think a lot of people know who she is, but Autumn is an assistant coach with the Philadelphia Eagles, and she is making history this Sunday at the Super Bowl because she is going to be the first Black woman to coach in the Super Bowl. So those are a couple few fun facts. As we at EarlyEngage, we like to celebrate cultural milestones and support, a number of different, cultures and drive awareness. So I thought it would be fun to mention that. And I also just wanted to make everybody aware we've got a couple of fun events coming up that if you're interested in attending, we have on Tuesday, February 21st, we are co-hosting a diversity roundtable with our friends at MAC Diversity Recruiting. And that is being held on Tuesday, February 21st. Samantha just popped the link in the chat. So if you'd like to join us, feel free to register for that. And then in celebration of International Women's Day, we are going to be joined by our facilitator named Christy Metcalf, who is going to be talking about the secrets of connected and confident women networkers. So certainly if you are a gentleman, you are more than welcome to join us, but it will have a little bit of a slant towards women. So with that, I am going to turn it over to LeAnne, and I'm going to take myself off camera and let her do her thing. Thanks, LeAnne.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Michelle and Janelle and Samantha for having me. And hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with you today. Another sort of thing we tend to celebrate in the month of February is Valentine's Day. And so when we were sort of planning this, we thought maybe we should, this idea of belonging cues, we can kind of, use a little bit of a Valentine's theme. So it's the first time I've ever kind of created content with just like a lot of pink and purple. But I had a lot of fun. And so I'm really excited to get a chance to talk to you today about one of my very favorite topics, and that is how it is that we can communicate belonging cues to our employees. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in with, and this is kind of my vibe always, is to start with the problem, is that in 2022, there was a really large study conducted. Of course, there's so many things going on in 2020 and 2021 and 2022. And so sometimes it feels like, trying to keep up with the research and the statistics is a job in and of itself. But there was a really large study that was conducted. And one of I think the most shocking and troubling statistics that was revealed was that 25%, so statistically 1 in 4 of our employees would say that at work, they feel like they don't fit in. And so at first you might think, well, 25%, that doesn't sound, terrible. But when you really start to imagine 4 people that in your organization, and then think about one of those people that is unique and distinct and brings value and, unique contributions to your organization, that one of them, at least one, is probably going to say that they don't feel like they fit in. So that's a really big problem if you're a leader in any capacity, or even if you are an individual contributor and you're wanting to really take ownership of the culture in your organization. Here's some good news though. Employees who do report in their organization, this is in that same study, that they have a high sense of belonging are 10 times more likely to say that they're satisfied with their jobs. And they're also 2 times more likely to be highly engaged in their work. Now that makes sense to us, right? As human beings, we crave connection. We crave feeling like we're a part of something bigger than ourselves. And so it makes sense that if we felt that way in our workplaces, whether that's face-to-face or virtual or hybrid or whatever configuration we're in, that if we feel that way, we're going to enjoy the jobs that we're doing more, right? And then in another study, this one was really interesting too. This also happened, this research was late 2022, that a sense of belonging emerged as the strongest predictor of employee engagement. And that's even a little bit different than some of the research prior to the pandemic. But it emerged as one of the leading driver of employee engagement, ahead of some of those traditional drivers, which by the way are still very important, but things like trust in leadership, opportunities for career development, growth, advancement, those sort of things. So if you're a leader or an individual contributor wanting to kind of take ownership of your culture, it's so crucial that we start thinking about how we can create environments where employees really feel like they belong. There is an important distinction to be made here, though, and it's that sometimes organizations will do the work, that internal work, laying the foundation for belonging and community and even feelings of, we celebrate diversity and inclusion around here. So they may do the internal work, the laying the foundation work, but actually fail to then communicate those things to employees, to send the cues. So those are 2 separate things, right? There are also, unfortunately, some organizations that will send the cues and want to send those messages, but haven't actually done the inner work, right? The foundational work that leads to that being an overflow of what you've already done and what you already accomplished as an organization. So I felt like it was important to make that distinction, because this is sort of where I come in. My work in my consulting practice primarily focuses on the intersection of, employee engagement and retention and performance management and communication competence. So we do the inner work, but then there's an additional layer of work where we sometimes can struggle as organizations, and that's all about how we communicate to employees. And so that's going to really be the focus of today. There's just not enough time to do a topic like this justice. There's so many different pockets and corners that we could explore, but my emphasis is really going to be on communication. And as Michelle shared, my background's in higher ed. And so for me, that's always been in communication, and that's always been a point of emphasis. So that's what you're going to hear from me today, is more about how we can send those belonging cues. So let's jump in. I want to give you a couple of definitions first of this idea of belonging. So most researchers will include both verbal and nonverbal messages when they think about belonging cues. I agree with that it really is not only the verbal messages we're sending, whether that's in our written communication, whether that's in a job posting somewhere, or whether that's how we're communicating with our bodies and with our faces and with our voices, right? But all of those things together, right? That those cues that we send to create connection, to help employees feel like they're a part of a shared mission, a shared purpose, right? That they're a part of a community. Daniel Coyle, who wrote The Culture Code, by the way, is a great read. If you signed up for this webinar, The Culture Code is a great read. I would recommend it to sort of anybody working in the people and culture space, but then also anybody who's leading people, or again, who cares deeply about the culture of your organization. So Daniel Coyle defines belonging cues as behaviors that create safe connections in groups. Belonging cues then are crucial if you want to build psychological safety in your organization. And psychological safety is this idea that employees feel comfortable speaking up, communicating up about concerns they have, problems they're having, what they think, what they feel, and also bringing their sort of authentic whole self to work. Belonging cues are also crucial if you want to lay the foundation for any meaningful DEI work. Now, the focus of today's session won't be on DEI specifically, because again, there's so much to say there. But what I will tell you is, you may have noticed, if you're kind of tuned in, that you, in addition to the DEI acronym, you might actually start to see people putting DEIB, B standing for belonging. I think that's fantastic, because what the research has shown is that in organizations, even those that are trying to do a lot of the internal work around DEI initiatives, that if they're leaving out the intentional, sending of messages around belonging, a lot of those initiatives are going to fall flat. So I think it's a crucial piece of the puzzle. It's not the only piece, right? It's a crucial piece of the puzzle. So that's what we're really going to focus on today. I also just want to say, as we get started, that if you have any ideas or questions or anything you want to throw in the chat, I would love to engage with you that way. One sort of potential limitation of this sort of format is that I can end up just, peppering you with ideas or strategies, and it can start to feel really overwhelming. And I want you to know that's never my goal, is that you leave a session with me, or really any session, hopefully you don't feel this way, feeling pressure or like, there's all these things we're failing at. The hope is that it would provide you an on-ramp to really think about some cool ways that you could grow as an organization or as a leader. So if you have any questions, any ideas, things that I don't mention that you'd like to throw in there, please feel free to do so. All right, so let's look at some of the additional research around belonging cues. So Daniel Coyle, I just mentioned, he has a really simple way of equipping teams and leaders around this idea of belonging cues. So according to him and his research, there's really 3 qualities of a belonging cue, right? So if you remember, this idea of a belonging cue is a verbal or nonverbal message that we're sending. So what are those 3 qualities? Well, the first one is energy. Now, this one can feel a little bit ambiguous, but it's the idea that when an employee feels like there has been intentionality, focus, right? Energy placed on them when there's an intention to communicate with them, to include them, to make them feel like they're a part of something bigger. That's the quality of energy. Sometimes I'll describe this as, imagine you're brand new, put yourself back in high school or middle school, you're brand new and you're walking through the cafeteria and somebody at a table looks at you with really bright eyes, perks up and says, hey, come sit with us, right? And so in that moment, that's a belonging cue to you that we want you to sit with us, but you see that energy in their face, their voice, you can feel it, it's authentic. So that's energy, right? There's intention. Individualization is a crucial component of the belonging kind of concept, because what we're saying here is, for an employee to feel like they belong, we have to really go through this process of individualizing to them and making them feel like their uniqueness is valued in the organization. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is going to focus right here in this area of individualization. And then the third quality of belonging cues is that and I think this one's so important, they're all important, but this one's so important too. And that is that there's a future orientation to this message, that there's a signal that the relationship is going to continue. You're not being included here or belonging here just, to check off a box for our organization, that you are here as a part of us, as a unique individual. We value you, we celebrate you, and you have a future here, right? So those are sort of the three qualities of nonverbal cue or of belonging cues. What we want to talk about today is how can we use this theory, this concept of belonging cues across the employee life cycle. Because a lot of organizations that I have a chance to work with, they're usually doing really well in one or two or three of these areas, these life cycle, stages. They're really maybe intentional about sending belonging cues during onboarding, or maybe they're really intentional about it in their employee development, right? But a really healthy culture of belonging requires you to think strategically about how you could send those messages through every stage. So this is the Gallup organization's kind of concept of the employee life cycle. There's other versions. I really like this one because I think it focuses on the outcomes more so than even just the stages, but the outcomes that are important in those particular stages. So you'll notice, attracting candidates, hiring them, onboarding them, engaging them, aiding in their performance management and development, right? And then, of course, departing, which I know is never the most fun to talk about if you're a leader or a manager, but it is very important. And it's an opportunity where we can continue to send good belonging cues. So let's jump in and let's talk about some ways that you can send belonging cues during that first stage, which is all about attracting. Now, this is an area where you really have to put your marketer hat on, if you will. And by the way, also, please, if your organization does something really well in one of these phases, I would love for you to share about that too. So, okay, when it comes to attracting candidates, the way we want to think about the role that belonging cues play is that we have to figure out, one, what is it that we offer, as it turns out, to our employees in way of our employer value proposition? So the EVP is really just the commitment or the promise that you're making to your employees for their commitment to work for you. So it's the sum of all of the benefits, right? More what we think of as traditional benefits like comp and, benefits themselves, but our time off, all those things, vacation. But it would also include things like what our culture is and how employees feel about working here and what makes us different than our competitors. So step one in being able to send really belonging cues throughout the entire life cycle is that you're clear as an organization on what your EVP is. Now, this takes a little bit of time and often some good employee listening to engage in, but it's worth it because once you have a good sense of what's the value that we really do deliver to our employees, you're in a position to think like a marketer, right? And then communicate to your candidates what you value as an organization and what it's like to be a part of your company. So a lot of times when I'm working with organizations and they have some sort of pain point in their recruitment strategies, right, their talent acquisition strategies, a lot of times I can isolate in the way that they communicate about themselves, whether it's in their job postings or it's on their web career page on their website, or it's even how they post stuff on their social media, right? I can identify a pain point that you're telling people about the job or the role, but you're actually not spending any time thinking like a marketer and showing these potential candidates what it's like to belong to this community. So you may be able to think about some examples of organizations that or maybe your organization does this really well, where you're able to watch a social media video or read a job posting and go, wow, that seems like a really cool place to work. When you show potential employees what you value, what matters to you, and what it's like to be a part of your organization, you actually begin to plant a seed, right, that they could belong here. So that's an important part of the puzzle that a lot of organizations miss out on. Another thing in the attraction phase, this is a very, very practical tip that I love, is having, and similar to what I shared just a moment ago, but sharing employee testimonials and also celebrating the uniqueness of your current team members, where those potential applicants can see that. So imagine, you're posting showcases of your current employees, and you're talking about things that they're interested in. You're mentioning that they have 2 pet prairie dogs, right? So see, I haven't done a very good job of communicating some of my quirkiness, right? But you're highlighting some of those things about your employees. You're sharing what they're interested in. Maybe you employ high school students, and so you have a chance to say, this is what this person wants to, do after graduation. You're highlighting the uniqueness of your team members in a way that communicates to potential applicants, hey, at this organization, they care about uniqueness. They care about what makes me distinct and what makes me special, right? So those are a couple of things very practically that you can do in that attraction phase. The takeaway on this slide is that it's marketing, right? It's your employer brand, and you can't do that well unless, of course, you've done some of that inner work that we talked about before. But my call to action on this slide would be to really spend some time with your internal partners, thinking about ways that you can, really, really focus on showing what it is like to be a team member at your organization, right? Now, let's say you're here and you're not a business leader in charge of creating systems and structures. If you're a people manager or a hiring manager, right, or a role like that, you still can, as a piece of that attraction employee lifecycle stage, have impact if you think about ways to even in how you communicate about the roles that are open in your organization, showcase what it's like to be a team member there. So those are a couple ideas for the attraction stage of the life cycle. Let's keep moving. And let's talk about hiring. Okay, so this is kind of a big, broad umbrella, but for sure it includes how we think through job postings. It also includes what we think about interviewing. So here are a couple of strategies you can use. One is that you want to make sure you are analyzing, you're evaluating the language that you're using in your job postings, the way that you structure your interviews, that you're trying to identify potential biases that may exist. I find that most organizations don't have ill intention, right? And in fact, I can't think off the top of my head of any that I've worked with that I have determined it is in fact ill intention, that they had, a job description that was not inclusive. But very recently, I was working with an organization where they were hiring for an engineering role, and they did have a pretty decent kind of distribution of both males and females in their organization, but the job description only used the pronoun he. Now, the person who wrote that job description was, by all accounts, and in my experience, a wonderful human being who probably wrote that job description very quickly and needed to crank it out, and was probably operating just, on his own kind of experiences, thinking about himself having been in that role before. But if you don't take time to really analyze the communication that you're putting out, you can unintentionally communicate to potential applicants that, well, this isn't that feels like that doesn't include me, or that feels like I wouldn't belong there, or they're sort of assuming something about me. So you want to analyze your communication for language that could exclude. And of course, you want to weed that out. Ask, get experts to help you with that. Ask colleagues to look over it. People that you trust in your organization, engage in some employee listening around that can make a really big difference. Similarly, every role is different. So every one of these tips and techniques and strategies may not work for your organization, but if possible in your organization, you can send belonging cues to employees during the hiring phase by showing them your commitment to assembling a diverse, panel to interview them, to engage with them, right? Diverse in terms, of course, of cultural tradition or background, diverse in terms of gender, diverse in terms of department and, unit, right? Or levels or layers, if you will, on the org chart. So putting a diverse panel together can send a message of belonging to potential team members that, hey, this is something that we value here. It matters to us that we have representation from lots of different groups. That's a very crucial way to send belonging cues. And then maybe one of my favorite ways to send belonging cues in a very practical way is in your application and your interview questions, create very nuanced questions that are eliciting or inviting applicants to speak to their uniqueness. So that goes beyond maybe asking a traditional question, which I think still has its place, but a question like, well, tell me about your strengths and your weaknesses, that you may reframe that question a bit to get at a little bit more nuance and say, what are the parts of your job that bring you the most energy, right? What are the parts of your job that drain you of energy? Can you hear the difference in those? Or you might say, if you were stranded on a desert island, and you could only use your talents to get you and your team off the island, what could you bring to the table, right? So you're asking these questions that are going to elicit uniqueness and distinction from your candidates. What that communicates to them is, this is a place that will see me, hopefully that is in fact the case, that will see me as a really unique individual that has very unique contributions to make. So I even really love to tell organizations, to tell leaders in some of your interviewing, during hiring, ask some really, really, fun, quirky questions about what people's favorite this is or favorite that is, because even though you may feel like those are frivolous questions, they still send a message that you care about the uniqueness of people. And that is what we're talking about with respect to belonging cues. So those are a couple of ideas that you can use during hiring. Let's move on and talk about onboarding. So I do a lot of work around the area of onboarding because it's an area where a lot of organizations can leave a lot on the table in terms of engagement and retention. A lot of times that onboarding phase feels very chaotic or can feel very hectic in an organization. But if you really build out some good processes, it can be a time for you to send those strategic messages to employees that they belong, that they matter, that you see them as unique individuals. So let's talk about a couple of strategies you can use. Number one, you can use pre-boarding to reduce uncertainty and build excitement. So that period of time after a candidate maybe signs an offer letter and they say, okay, I agree, I'm working for you, I'll see you in 2 weeks or whatever, right? A lot of times organizations, because you're busy and you get in a rhythm and you get in kind of just that hectic, my grandpa used to call it the rat race, I don't know. That's the phrase that comes to mind, but you get in that just busyness that you forget that during that 2 weeks of time, there's a lot of opportunity for you to send belonging cues to your new team members. So you can use pre-boarding to reduce the uncertainty that employees are feeling and build excitement and momentum. And it can be very simple things like, making sure that they know what's expected of them on the first day, that they have everything they need, making sure that you're sending them messages about who they're going to be working with, right? That you're sending them welcome videos, that maybe you have some pre-recorded even assets that you can, automate to send their way to remind them that you're still thinking about them. You haven't forgotten about them. One organization I work with, they always like to, once someone has agreed to work for them, in the next sort of team meeting they have, which always happens at least within a week, they record like a little selfie video for that particular person. It takes the team like 15 to 20 seconds to do it. And whoever's leading that meeting just says, like, hey, Samantha, we're so excited. We're here. We're talking about this and this and this. We can't wait to have you join us. Now, imagine if you're a candidate and you get something, you get a video like that before your first day. Imagine what kind of excitement and momentum that's going to build, that they're already thinking about me. I think I might belong here. I think I might matter here. So that's something practical you can do. Then you also want to send belonging cues, go all in on day one. Here's an area where I see a lot of organizations make a lot of mistakes. And it's because, again, you get really busy and you forget about what that day one experience can feel like. For a lot of employees, they will say on that first day, I feel like an intruder. I feel like I'm, bothering people, but like, I don't have a desk yet. And I don't have my computer's not ready, or it just seems like I'm interrupting people. And that is the opposite of sending belonging cues, right? So if you want to pave the way for really strong belonging during onboarding, you absolutely have to pay attention to the messages that you're sending. Day one, everything that an employee does on day one, I think should fall under one of these 4 messages. All 4 of these messages here send belonging cues, and you can accomplish them in a lot of different ways. But I would encourage you to do sort of an audit. If you're in a position to really impact onboarding, do an audit and evaluate what are the messages that we're sending by the tasks that we have, by the environment we have on that day one experience. So send the message, we've been expecting you. It is not a surprise that you're here. I present at conferences a lot on onboarding, and I cannot tell you the number of times that people have come and told me stories like, I showed up and nobody knew I was coming. And actually my new boss had taken the day off. And, I talked to somebody last year who told me that they showed up for their first day and the rest of the team had gone on some kind of retreat and they had forgotten that this was that person's first day. And so that's sort of a nightmare scenario in terms of belonging cues. You can imagine that employee did not stay there very long, but we want to instead send those messages that we've been expecting you. We are so pumped that you're here. We have been waiting anxiously for you to join us, and we know you're going to bring so much value and add so much to our culture. This is a special place. We do really important work here, and that future orientation, you've got a future with us, right? So audit your day one experience, go all in on it. And I wish that I had another 30 minutes to talk through this one with you in particular, but make sure you audit that, because if you get this one wrong, it really impacts perceptions of belonging indefinitely, right? So focus on this one big time. Michelle, I'm loving some of these comments that you're making. If anybody else has any stories or examples to share, please do. Yeah, laptop has not been ordered. Really hampers the onboarding process again, and it just makes that person feel like I'm the intruder. Everybody else is operating already, and I feel like I should not be here. So that's something to really think about. Another very practical thing now that I just can't help myself, I'm going to share, is I recommend, if possible, on day one, instead of, like, let's say you've brought on a new employee and you're going to walk them around the office and introduce them to people. I mean, that's a great idea in theory because it gives them a chance to build some social connection. What can get you in trouble, though, is if you think about, I'm taking this one person around to all these offices. This is imagining we're in a physical, actual physical location. But if I'm taking all these employees around, what can end up happening is that employee with that new employee already feels a little bit like an intruder, wondering if they belong. And now I'm taking them to someone's door and somebody's working. It's kind of hard to illustrate here on on Zoom, but somebody's working and I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm interrupting this person. And I have to do that about 15 times, and that person's in the middle of a thought and their hands are still on their computer and they're like, oh, and they're being friendly. Hi, but I still feel like I'm, bothering them or intruding them. So one thing I love to recommend is instead of you going around, that it becomes a cultural norm in your organization that, hey, we know, like I'm going to use Samantha as an example. We know Samantha's first day. So it's our responsibility, as her team members, at some point today, we are going to tell her how excited we are that she's here, to introduce ourselves. We're going to move to her as opposed to having her kind of do that parade. It's a small difference, but it's small difference in terms of logistics, but it makes a very big difference in terms of belonging cues. So think about that day one experience. You also, similar to what I shared earlier, consider creating, social media or, a short video or other kind of internal communication that's unique to your organization to highlight them and their uniqueness. So one of the organizations that I work with, they have this cool tradition where when they onboard a new employee, and they're mostly virtual, hybrid a little bit, but mostly virtual. And they, when they bring in a new team member into a meeting, they have this little tradition where for the first time, they have a list of questions that they ask every employee there. And it's this fun tradition. It's very individualized. And they do that as soon as they possibly can. And when I helped them facilitate an engagement survey, it was something that showed up several times in a very positive light, that employees said, I felt so welcomed. I felt so a part of the community. That really mattered to me. So again, it doesn't take a lot of time to facilitate some of this, but it can make a very, very big difference. Again, the point is individualization, highlight their uniqueness. Michelle, absolutely. These things can be done on Slack. They can be done in physical locations, and they can be done virtually. Okay, one more onboarding idea is to, at some point during the onboarding process, create a space for this new employee to talk about their unique strengths and how those strengths align with the role. There were some researchers that were interested in how could we tweak the onboarding process to improve retention, and the most statistically significant change that they made where they saw big improvement in retention 9 months later in a high turnover position was creating a space for those new employees to talk about their strengths and how they felt like they could use those strengths in the job. Now you may be thinking, well, theoretically, we've probably already talked about that in a job interview. They've had a chance to reflect on how their strengths align with their role. But what we're talking about here is a sense of belonging. And so if you imagine you get the job, but now you find yourself sitting in an environment with people you don't know, right? It's maybe a physical or a digital space that is unfamiliar to you. Suddenly you're responsible for new tasks, new responsibilities. And so to have a moment where you go, wow, I've been asked about my unique strengths, how they align with my role, even if it's 5 to 10 minutes, has been shown it's the most statistically significant thing that you can do during onboarding relationally, that is, to lead to that higher retention later. So give them a little bit of space. Sometimes I will say to a hiring manager, even if you just in your first one-on-one, revisit some of those conversations. I remember in our interview, you had a chance to share a little bit about how, you get energy around these sort of tasks. That really excites me because I think you're going to enjoy working with so-and-so. I mean, it takes some time to individualize, but it's so worth it. So those are some onboarding strategies for you. Now we're going to kind of the phase of the employee life cycle that's a little bit more, it's longer, obviously, in duration. And so there's a lot more that we could talk about here. I deliver, workshops and trainings that are, 2 or 3 hours on almost all of these little sticky note topics that we're going to talk about. So I'm going to do my best to kind of summarize for you. But during this engage, period of time, where what you're really trying to do is create environments where employees feel connected to their roles and to the organization as a whole, that they're enthusiastic about their role and you're organization? What are some things you can do to continue to send belonging cues during those phases? So one would be, and this is such a big topic. And again, I won't be able to do it justice in just a few minutes, but celebrate and nurture diversity and inclusion in the organization. Remember that slide earlier where I said, this really does take a lot of that inner work, that foundational work to get to a point where you can celebrate and really nurture it. Or maybe I should even say, communicate that you are in fact valuing and nurturing and celebrating it. So a couple of things, again, very high level, 30,000 foot view here would be very practically, you could send belonging cues by creating employee resource groups, for employees who represent, different groups, different passions, different traditions, cultural traditions, different even religious experiences or identities. You could create employee resource groups around what really matters the most to your employees. You create those kind of spaces. What you're doing is saying, you're sending those cues to your team members that we care about your entire identity here. We care about everything that makes you you. Every part of who you are matters to us. And we want you to feel like you can bring your authentic full self to work, right? So create employee resource groups, recognize cultural celebrations. When I was kind of putting some final touches on this slide deck today, I actually thought to myself, I don't know anybody who does this better than Michelle and Janelle. I think about a lot of the work that they do in EarlyEngage and, in early HR, where they're really, really working hard to highlight cultural celebrations, to bring focus to that in organizations. That's an incredible way to send belonging cues. You can also provide training and equipping where you're providing not just training and equipping for your leaders, but for everybody in the organization around your DEI efforts and really belonging efforts in general. Again, so much more to say there. And also, just as a piggyback on what I shared on the last slide, really just creating spaces for employees to share their personal identities, to share their experiences, to share what they're struggling with, maybe even with respect to aspects of their identity. So sending the cues is step 2. And this one, right? That has to happen after you've done a lot of that inner work. So let's keep moving. This is another really big one that you can kind of focus on during the engage phase of the life cycle. And that is to build a listening strategy that paves the way for trust and psychological safety. Because one of the factors that affects employees' perception of belonging more than any other is, do I feel like my voice matters? Do I feel like my opinion matters? And in the United States, currently, according to the Gallup organization, only 3 in 10 employees agree with the statement, at work, my opinions seem to count. And so when you consider that, and then some of the statistics that I shared earlier about belonging, that makes a lot of sense. However, if you were to work in an organization where you did feel like your opinion mattered, that your voice mattered, you would be much more likely to feel like you belong because your voice is being recognized and amplified, right? So build a listening strategy that goes beyond just your sort of traditional annual, maybe employee engagement survey, which, by the way, I do think still has a place in organizations as a part of your listening strategy, but build one that's more continuous where you're sending those belonging cues. Hey, your voice matters. We care about what you see that we don't. What are we missing, right? Where can we add clarity? What problems do you notice? The more that we're asking those kind of questions, we're actually sending belonging cues at the same time. All right, let's look at number 3 here, which is to create team rituals, rites of passage, and also shared language. Now, this one can get you in trouble though, because in some organizations, they do such a good job of this for for employees, like building these inside jokes and traditions and kind of quirky things they do together, that then when somebody new comes into the group, it is actually the thing that makes them feel like they don't belong. So you do want to be careful about, not explaining all the things to your new people, including them, but it is a very effective strategy for building belonging as a part of your engagement as a part of your overall kind of engagement strategy. So I shared an example earlier about this organization I work with, one of my clients who has some of these traditions that they do on Zoom meetings. And it's been very, very effective for them. And it's one of the things that their employees love the most about them. I'll share a personal example too, on the rites of passage. When I was in college, I grew up in Ruidoso, New Mexico. And I worked at a really popular kind of tourist steak restaurant there. It's called Cattle Baron. And I worked there for an entire summer in between, two of my college years. And there was this process at the restaurant where you weren't allowed, if you were a brand new server, you weren't allowed to, have your section, like your, 4 or 5 tables, whatever it is, in kind of this priority seating area. You weren't allowed to do that until really you had kind of demonstrated competence and you had kind of a track record of effectiveness, which made total sense. But it was this rite of passage that happened where once you had been there for a certain amount of time, once you had gotten, X amount of positive feedback from customers, you were able to sort of graduate into this new area. Now, what they did was at the pre-shift meeting that we had, right before the doors open and everybody comes in from the racetrack at the time, they made this like little ceremony. And they had this thing where they said, guess what? LeAnne is, she's moving to section, whatever it was, I don't remember. And everybody clapped, and they actually had this like little kind of trinket that they gave out as a way to kind of commemorate this. Now you could say that sounds really silly, but here's the thing, that was a long time ago. And right now I still feel a little bit of that. Wow, like that meant a lot to me, that rite of passage, that feeling of sort of graduating into something, feeling like I was a part of this inside thing now, and everybody was celebrating me. So think about ways in your organization that you could facilitate something like that, right? That's a way to send a belonging cue. What are those rituals, some of those quirky cultural things that you can do? Rites of passage, shared language. Just don't forget about your new employees, because if you go too heavy on this without including them, you're going to have major belonging problems from that. Okay, let's keep moving. And then this last one, again, a very broad topic, but another way we send belonging cues is by creating spaces for employees to form social connections, relational connections. This has become a real challenge for a lot of organizations due to, of course, the pandemic and the rise in remote work. This is an area where I think is going to be very interesting to see what the research shows us, even in a few years. We're already starting to see a little bit of a wave of individuals saying that they crave more in-person events, in-person, feeling connected to people physically. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of how that shakes out. All that said, even if you are in virtual or remote environments, you can still create intentional time and spaces for employees to form connections and social bonds. So make sure you don't forget about that, because that's a huge component of belonging. All right, let's talk about the perform stage. Again, this one is a little bit bigger in nature. There's a lot that goes under this umbrella. So I'm going to move through these a little bit quicker because they're a little bit broad. One, using a strengths-based approach to performance feedback is a phenomenal way to send belonging cues, because what you're doing by delivering feedback, both praise and recognition, and also, critical evaluative or developmental feedback, when you do that in light of someone's strengths, it makes them feel very seen. It makes them feel very valued for their uniqueness. So that might be, if I say to an employee, maybe they're struggling with organization or something. They're not the most organized employee, but if I know that perhaps the reason this employee struggles more with organization is because they are incredibly creative and they're innovative and they're out of the box thinkers, and they bring so much value in that area, that if I say to them, I'm curious if one of the reasons you're struggling with organization and all these administrative tasks is because you are so gifted in these particular areas. What strategies can we use? What strengths can we use that you do have to help you get to those outcomes that you need, right? It's not to excuse poor performance or to downplay what the problems are, but it's framing that performance feedback in light of what does come naturally to them, the unique value that they bring. It makes a huge difference in engagement and retention and performance management. All right, here's the second one. Similarly, is to consistently communicate how their unique role contributes to the overall vision and mission of the organization. So there's, an old story. It's one of my favorite. I really do get chills almost every single time I tell this story, but the story goes that, this happened decades ago during the space race. President, Kennedy is going to Houston, and he's, meeting with the brightest minds, and there's so many just amazing things happening in the country at the time. And the story goes that he runs into a janitor sweeping in a closet, and he introduces himself and says, I'm the president, as it turns out. And who are you and what are you doing? And the story goes that this janitor looked at him and, introduces himself and then said, and I'm helping to send a man to the moon. And now I know that may sound a little bit cheesy, but that pumps me up, because what that says to me is that somebody in that organization had already done a good job helping every single person in all their different roles understand how they contributed to the overall vision, mission, and purpose and the values of the organization, so that every single role feels like I'm part of something bigger than myself. So if you're a manager, if you're a colleague, right, if you're an executive leader, sending belonging cues, a piece of that is making sure that employees realize how what they do every day, logistically, right? Tactically, what they do every day connects to the whole thing, right? That's a really powerful way to send belonging cues. You can also deliver very concrete and individualized recognition and rewards. So asking team members to, hey, how do you prefer to be recognized is a huge part of this, because some people like me actually are very uncomfortable with sort of public praise and recognition. If my manager, kind of recognizes me in a team meeting and wants everybody to clap or something, I sort of want to crawl in a hole. But some of us really get fuel and energy out of that. So it's asking team members, how do you prefer to be, praised and recognized? What kind of rewards do you like to receive? And then delivering that. That's another powerful way to send belonging cues. And then, of course, this one, I realize it's a very big, but create policies that reflect your care for the whole self, foster employee well-being. And so that goes back to a lot of that inner work. It's difficult to capture that on one slide of a PowerPoint presentation, but to send belonging cues that are genuine and authentic, it's so important for us to evaluate, do the policies and procedures we have in place really lead to the thriving and flourishing of our people, not just in their work, but in their lives, right? Can we start to think more about people as a full integrated person, as opposed to just the tasks that they perform here? We can do that well, we're going to be successfully sending belonging cues. All right, we're getting towards the end of the life cycle here. The develop phase, it's so hard for me actually to separate this from perform and engage. I sort of see them as like all working together. But if we were to separate it out and think, well, what are some things that we could do to, develop our employees in a way that also sends belonging cues? Of course, we're going to communicate that they belong and that they have a future with us, that future orientation we talked about. If we're investing in their professional development, if we invest in coaching for them, if we invest in internal, internal job shadowing or peer, kind of cross-training opportunities, if we can send cues to them that you have a future here, we're investing in you, we're spending time, energy, resources on you because we believe in the work that you're doing and how it contributes to our overall success. So Michelle, I love this about PTO, adequate, absolutely. So it's all of those things, that those policies and procedures that we put in place, that we want to think, does that in fact make our employees feel valued and important and seen and understood? So I love that. And then another just little practical thing here in the develop phase would be to create individual development plans, or IDPs, for employees. So these are different than kind of your annual performance reviews, right? Those kind of things that are more evaluative in nature. Your IDP is much more focused on what are your long-term career goals, whether you're here or not, right? What do you really want to do? What do you want to learn? And how can we invest in you? That's going to be sending powerful cues. All right. And then here we are, we're in the depart phase. And this is the one that, especially if you're, a leader, you're in charge of engagement and retention, this one can be kind of wounding, but is really important to think about the opportunities that you could have in this stage of the life cycle. Now, I do realize that every employee departure is different, and some there's a lot of goodwill and a lot of warmth, and as the individual goes. And in some cases, some of these things would not be wise to do. So absolutely use your discernment. But these are some things that I love for organizations to do that continue to send belonging messages. For example, and many organizations do this one, creating spaces for everyone to celebrate and send this person off, right? To make them not feel like they're leaving in shame or everybody's mad, but that, wow, I feel celebrated. I actually feel sent off. I feel like they're happy for me that I found this opportunity that maybe is a better fit for me and my family or my career goals, right? So creating spaces to celebrate them, giving a departing gift that has special meaning to them, or one that I maybe even love more than that is anticipates a need that they will have. So I just a couple of weeks ago talked to a family member who, my friends and family will send me examples of things, and I love that. But they said that when their husband resigned, and they threw him a party, but they also gave him like a $200, which is a lot, I know, but a $200 Walmart gift card, and said, we know like moving is expensive, so here. And that just blew me away. And I thought, that's continuing to send belonging cues, that even though you're transitioning out and you're moving on, you were so important to us. We so value you. We want to send you out to be, successful and enjoy this new season of your life. So I love that idea. Publicly recognize and celebrate their accomplishments and their unique contributions. So post something on social media about an employee who's leaving. Again, I realize this may not always be the wisest depending on the situation, but if you have an employee that you can really celebrate and say, wow, look at everything that this person accomplished. These are the things we're going to miss about them. We're so pumped about this new phase. They're going to be working on this new thing. I mean, if you can do that, that also helps your employer brand, right? Not that that's the reason we do it, but it also communicates to employees, wow, that seems almost odd that an organization would send those kind of cues to their employees, even at the very end when they're on their way out. So think about publicly recognizing them. And then this one does take some effort, but I've seen it work really well, especially with organizations that are employing maybe a lot of part-time employees or younger, like high school, college students. Add them to some sort of alumni employee group that kind of gets together sometime. Another thing I always recommend to the managers that I kind of coach is, if you have an employee departing and things are good relationally, go ahead and put on your calendar, a call in a couple of months. Like, I really want to catch up with you, because that's sending a cue to them that they really matter to you. And again, hopefully that's coming from an authentic place, but can really send some positive cues on the way out. So all of that said, I know that is a lot of information because we're covering, the employee life cycle. It's by no means exhaustive. I'm sure as you were reading through some of these things, you were remembering things that your organization does or things you've seen or done before. My goal is never to heap pressure and shame and guilt on leaders for not doing every single one of these things. My question for you, what I really want you to leave with is, what are just one thing or a couple of concrete things that you could do in the next month to send more belonging cues, right? Because those small improvements add up to incredible culture change. So don't let yourself get overwhelmed. Maybe focus on one or two that feel, easier for you to accomplish, and then see what else you can move on later. But everyone in the organization deserves to feel seen, heard, valued, and like they belong. So it's a lot of work. Thank you so much, Michelle. I'm going to pass it back to you. But I would also just love to stay in touch with any and all of you. Here's some contact information. Thanks so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun. Michelle, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you. Sam, do you want to make a quick announcement?
Yeah, I'm going to pop a link in the chat. It's just a quick survey. If you guys could fill that out for us, that would be awesome. If you fill it out before 4 p.m. Central Time, you will be entered in for a gift card. So it just takes a couple of minutes to fill out.
Yeah, we appreciate your feedback. So if you can fill that out, that would be awesome. LeAnne, as always, you have such a wealth of information. I love the work that you do around connections and belonging. And obviously with us, providing EarlyEngage, it's something that we are very passionate about. And I always say it's the little things that are big things. There's a lot of people that think they have to have these big, expensive initiatives. And hopefully what everybody's taking away is, a lot of these things, they don't really cost anything and they don't take up a huge amount of time. It's just some little quick things that can be implemented. And it really does go such a long way. So thank you for the great ideas. If you are a member of EarlyEngage, your HR contact will have a recording of this at their disposal. So if you have a team member that missed it and you want to share this, then just reach out to your HR contact. If you want to know more about EarlyEngage, we'd love to hear from you. And we just want to thank you again for coming today. So we hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day and the rest of February, and hope to see you at our next session. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.